let's talk about inflation.
Financially speaking, I mean.
I expect so.
Yeah, especially with the way prices are going up these days. Yesterday, I went in to buy a soup bone. Just a common, ordinary soup bone. 78 cents, he says. 78 cents, I says to him. You used to throw them in for nothing. Not no more, he says. 78 cents. That'll give you a faint idea. Soup bone. 78 cents.
In this video, we're going to talk about what inflation is, where it comes from, and what are the effects of inflation. Not just higher prices, but also the spiritual and personal effects on society. Inflation, by definition, is an increase in the money supply. This means that the stock of money is increased, therefore that each individual monetary unit has less value. Inflation of the money supply comes from a central bank printing money. In the United States, we have the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank. I like calling it the federal bank because that's what it is. It's a monopoly on the production of money. No one else can print money, or else it's called counterfeit, and you will be imprisoned for this. So the central bank essentially prints money out of nothing because it's no longer backed by gold after 1971, and essentially the government is able to export this money around the world, which is inflation. But the main purpose of this video is to talk about the consequences of inflation. Primarily, when we print more money and each individual monetary unit becomes less valuable, this means the purchasing power, the amount of money it takes to buy a good, also decreases, meaning there's more additional required units of money to buy the same amount of goods and services. When this new money is created by the central bank, it goes to the banks first, the friends of the bank second, and then eventually it trickles down to the rest of the society. We can call these later receivers of the newly created money the less fortunate people, because the first receivers of the newly created money get to go to the market and buy goods. These can be consumer goods. They can also be assets such as real estate or stocks or gold. In regards to consumer prices, these people who buy the goods basically signal that there's an increased demand for these goods. Once the producers of these consumer goods receive the signal that there's an increased demand for these goods, then they raise prices. The later receivers of the newly created money now have to go to the market and buy the same amount of goods but at higher prices. So an increase in prices is a symptom of inflation. It is not the cause or the definition of inflation. Moreover, not just in consumer goods, but in assets, we have an overproportionate asset price inflation. Why is it that real estate is so expensive now? It's because the people who receive this newly created money go into buying real estate and other assets. They're bidding up over proportionally these assets, and so the price increases as well. And I think what's very important to note here is that this is a behavioral change from a free market society. In a free market, we wouldn't have over proportionate asset price inflation, and we wouldn't have consumer price inflation to this degree. And this effect is accumulated in time preference. When people save money, they basically have a low time preference, which means they're looking further into the future, maybe decades, for their investments, what they can accumulate for their savings, retirement. But when the money is printed and the money is devalued, then people have to orient their time preference towards the immediate present moment, which means they have a higher time preference. That means they prefer the present moment over the future. So instead of saving so much for the future, people begin to spend for the present moment. And the spiritual consequences of this is that people begin to lose faith in the future. They begin to lose faith in money. Money is a medium of exchange. It's something we can trust to verify that we don't have to immediately barter for a good and consume at the present moment. When we exchange, we do indirect exchange, meaning we're not directly bartering apples for oranges. We exchange money for oranges or money for apples. And this money that's accumulated by people is something we can use to also indirectly exchange for goods in the future. When this trust breaks down in money, people begin to lose trust in society. How do I know I'll be able to buy what I want in the future if the money's no good? And I think this begins to manifest in the ideas of nihilism, cynicism for the future, that everything is fucked. And when you understand that the higher time preference societies are not societies of civilization but decadence, you can understand how cultural decay begins to manifest, and it's directly linked to monetary policy. For example, Rome fell due to inflation and the establishment of price controls. When goods were no longer immediately available, they distracted people with bread and circuses, and as the society collapsed, that allowed for invading barbarian tribes to enter. And perhaps the most nefarious effect of inflation and central banking, the Federal Reserve, is that it goes to government spending, and the government is an institution of war. The government prints tens and trillions of dollars to go fight wars all over the world. If you had to directly tax the citizenry and they felt the pain of paying for all these wars out of their own pocket, you guarantee there's going to be people who would be very resistant to war. But the government just prints it out of nothing, ex nihilo, and then they go fight these wars, and people have to bear the consequences of higher prices in the future, which is the younger generations like myself. That is why in this country, 50% of 30-year-olds are not married and can't afford a home. This is the policy of the state welfare warfare programs. People like to say that, well, we need to print money for welfare. But the welfare we produce is not just money that's going to those who are less fortunate and needing of money and food and housing. It's going to corporations, which is corporatism or cronyism or what is called fascism. This is a phenomena of state intervention in society. It's not a phenomena of the free market. The welfare produced by central bank government policies, the fiscal policies, is not just welfare for the less fortunate members of society, it's also welfare for corporations and billionaires. This is why they advocate for central banking fiscal monetary policy, because they get a check from it. They get the benefits and the kickbacks. That's why when you have inflation from a central bank, this distortion of monetary inequality increases. It doesn't decrease. Government is always going to provide for themselves and their friends first before the citizenry. And when this government has the power to spend as it pleases, then it's going to create a society that's curated to the desires of the government, which is always going to be a socialized society, a politicized society, a society where people have to be more dependent on government handouts and government welfare. The whole institution of the military is a giant welfare scheme where we give up our lives and freedom to be cared for and paid for by the government. So I would say the most important point to understand about money and inflation is the idea of property. If you own your money, then no one has a right to devalue it. If you own yourself, then no one has a higher claim to it than you do. But if we have a central bank that's devaluing everyone's money, then the property has become socialized, the money has become socialized, and you don't really own it. The government does. I hope this video has provided you some insight on inflation and the mechanisms behind what produces it and what are the consequences of it. I'm going to be making videos every Saturday, so please subscribe and let's learn about civilization and its enemies together.